Good morning. How's it going? Hey, everybody. My name's Ken. Ken Wheeler, and that's Ken_Wheeler on Twitter. And I work at a company called Formidable, which is a JavaScript consultancy based out of Seattle, where we do dank things with Node, React, GraphQL, and we actually have a sponsor booth here today, and you can head over there and talk to them. And if you do, it's crazy, they're going to give you open source software for free. Okay. So on the schedule it says State of React, but I'm not really that guy. So I'm here to talk about the new hotness, which is, I guess, is the state of React. So we're going to talk about the new hotness in React. And I guess, sorry, I keep leaning into the microphone. Yeah, so the story starts back here at React 16. So when this first came out, this was the first glimpse of some of the stuff that we're seeing today. It started with Fiber. So Fiber, right, is a re-architecture of the React reconciler. I'm sure plenty of you have heard of it. And it was created to support granular update control, right? So when the reconciler runs, that's a funny feedback. So when the reconciler runs, it'll split the different things into little pieces of work, and you can assign priority to them and do async rendering, right? So you have this incremental and async rendering. So that is what the new architecture was built to support. However, you didn't see a lot of that used right out of the gate. You just got the architecture. You didn't get to play with any of the crazy stuff just yet. Right? So not too long ago, 16.3 came out, and we started to see some of this stuff emerging, or at least some of the plans for it. So we got a couple fun new things here, and I'm going to talk about those real quick before getting into some of the future stuff. So first up is life cycles. I don't know if any converted anything yet. I haven't, but I'm going to. So a couple of these, they're not dead, right? So this is maybe not fair to delete tag them. Component will mount, component will receive props, and component will update. They're not dead. They're going to stay around for a little while. They're going to be prefixed with an unsafe thing, so you know to fix it later. So they stick around. But for async safety, you're going to want to transition to the new ones, which are get derived state from props and get snapshot before update, which will allow you to do the same sort of things that you previously had done with those other ones, but this time safely, right? So why the change? What's this safety all about? So with this new async architecture, right, we have these new life cycles that replace the older methods, because the older methods probably will cause problems like memory leaks with async. The new ones don't, it's not like guaranteed to not cause problems, but you're a lot safer, right? And they also added some other stuff like the strict mode tag. So if you wrap your entire app in the strict mode tag, any unsafe patterns that you're using will get logged out in the console, and you'll know to address that before diving into async. Also, there's a thing called create subscription. So if you're doing any kind of subscription stuff, that'll allow you to do that safely, or better. It's a migration path. It's not. I was told to say that it's not guaranteed. So take it or leave it. And here is this chart. I'm sure a lot of people have seen, but this shows how these new life cycles fit in. I didn't really actually have a lot to say about this chart. There's a really cool interactive example out there if you feel like finding it. But I did want to say that it was funny. I was in Finland like 2 weeks ago, and I saw this taped up in a bathroom. And I thought that was awesome. And I'm going to start printing them out and taping them up in bathrooms. So people outside of technology start casually referencing it. So I think it's something I think we should all be familiar with. Right? So what else was introduced? Context. Oh man, is that my favorite feature in the whole entire world. And now you don't have to feel bad about using it. Right? So context was previously like a secret API. right? It was not documented until recently, and when it was, it came with quite the warning. Now, with the new version, it's fully supported. They recommend using it. A lot of the time, you might not have used it if you weren't writing a library, but almost every library that you would normally put into a React application uses it, right? Because what it does is it teleports data through your tree, right? Just to go a little bit more on that. If you have something up here and you have 4 components in between, without context, you'd have to pass it down props the whole way along. Or if you're the worst, you spread prop it all the way down. Don't do that. But now, right, if these other components don't need to know about that, right, you can just go from this guy up here to this rascal down here and just send it straight down without having to pass it explicitly all the way. And that opens up patterns to do all kinds of fun stuff. React Redux uses context. A lot of the things that you probably use, styled components, theming uses context. A lot of the fun patterns that you see are all context driven. And it lets me do a bunch of the dumb stuff I do, like making music with React and things like that. So let's talk about how this new context works if you haven't played with it yet. So there's this new import, right, from React. My highlighting show up? Yeah. Which is create context, right? So previously, you would have just a single context that lived the whole way down. It was like a state, but like global almost, but it could be overridden hierarchically, doesn't matter. Now you can create individual contexts for individual uses of context. So if you had like a theme thing and a data thing, they could have their own individual context. And when you create a context, what it gives you back is 2 components to use: a provider and a consumer. You might, if you've ever used this obscure library Redux, you might be familiar with the provider. The consumer might be a little bit new, but it uses render props, so that's good, right? So when you actually use it, you have your provider here, and you pass down a value. And I'm being a silly goose and passing an object literal here, but I guess you probably wouldn't do that if you get paid to do this for a living. I digress. But this will pass that down to anything below it. And that's how you provide the value. You can update this value, and what's getting sent down updates. Then you have your consumer, right? Say this count display component is something way farther down in the tree. Most of my examples, I don't have the time to sit here and just make this like really nested tree, so we're just going to pretend that it's like 8 levels deep. So you have this consumer, and then it does a render prop here, and you can destructure count out and use it right here. So this consumer will update if you update that parent provider, and you're good to go. All right? So if you were to build this into a library, what if they don't use the provider? What is one to do? Well, I'll tell you what, those React rascals, they thought of everything. So when you're creating your context back over here, like I showed just a second ago, you can supply this default argument here, which is your default value. So this also opens up some pretty fun patterns, a demo of which I'm going to show pretty soon, where if you don't have a provider, that's what the consumer is providing, so your app doesn't break. So how about we look at some of those demos now? All right. Whoa, no, don't, no. That shit shows like recent edits. Okay, all right. That was a close one, folks. All right, so my first context demo, so there's a couple different things that you can use context for. A lot of people are like, I'm going to replace Redux, which you actually can. Not entirely, but if you want to do data, you can do that. But another thing is theming. And this demo was actually prompted from a tweet that I saw by Dan Abramoff, surprise, surprise, where he suggested that you'd be able to override entire parts of websites by using this new context. So after clarifying what he meant, I went ahead and put it into practice. Let me unfull screen this. Okay, so let's say we have a store. Let's say we have an e-commerce site, Right? I don't know what this means. I'm told that it says the little market, but I can't be sure. So if it's anything offensive, I deeply apologize. And in here we sell baguettes. I'm also unsure of the price of baguettes or why it's priced in dollars in this clearly French store. But I digress. Say we have a very successful e-commerce French store that sells the same loaf of bread 6 times. But let's say it's not doing so well with the American market. What are we to do? Right? So if we didn't set this up prior, we're going to have to rebuild this whole site to look ridiculous. But if we use the new context and we preemptively thought of being able to override certain things to support absurd markets, then we might have a chance here. So I'm just going to run through this for a second. I'm kicking shit over here. So I'm setting up the default context right here, where I have the baguette image and I have the header, both of which are overridable. Right? So we create the context. And before, when I was saying open up the cool patterns with the defaults, here we have the image and the header component, which are set as defaults because you've done that as the first argument. If we go look at these actual components, if you look at them being used, right, all we have is this container, and then we have a header with a logo, body, and product. It looks like I got into some styled components or something. And then we look at the individual components, what's going on inside of there. So our default header, we have this styled header right here. And then what if we had another header that we could use there? Right? And then our image was overridable, right? So here for our product, we have our consumer, right? It doesn't have a provider, so it's gonna do the default. It gets image off the context and it puts it into this image tag, right? So that's where you get your baguette from. Your default header component, right, is gonna have the header component that gets supplied here. So if we simply add a provider right here, we can override all of that because we've preempted that. So now I can set a new value, right, where I can say image is going to be the loaf, and let's say our header component is going to equal, let's go ahead and import that. Import America header from America header. Okay, that's great. And it should have done it. Is this? Oh, okay. We're gonna start. Whatever. And then magically, we're making American sale. Hold on, I got to do a little something else here. We can't have Zapfino. Let's change it to something a little bit more American. Okay. Now we're talking business. Okay. All right. So I have another context demo before we move on, which is a toast demo. I know how much you guys love bread. No, it's not that kind of toast. It's the kind of toast where it's like a notification, right? So I'm a little short on time here. All right, so yeah, say we want to create a notification system. We can do that too, because it's not only components you can pass down, but you can pass down methods on parent components. So if we go into our toast demo here, right, we have a state, right, that holds the toast that should be displayed. Then we have this add toast, right, that'll just kind of set state with whatever thing you send in there. Remove, which will remove it. And then render, which will render the actual notifications at the top level here, right? You have this render toast. Then we have a provider, and we're going to pass down a value. Again, like I was saying before about the object literal being a problem, if you don't have dynamic values, right, you can just put it right here as like a property initializer thing, and just say this.context value, and we pass down to a child component the methods that are on this parent component, where we can call them. So the button is going to be the component that gets that. We come in here, we have our consumer. When clicked, it'll do add toast, right? And then for our toast itself, right, we have remove toast. So once they're up, you can click them, right? So if we come here, we can see these fun notifications pop in. And, no matter how far down these buttons were, it's going to surface them up at the top level where you want them. This could apply to modals, or maybe you use a portal for that. But there's a lot of fun that can be had by passing stuff down. Okay. So next up, we're going to talk about suspense. And what's really exciting, right, is if you've heard of suspense and you've been following it, if you saw Dan's talk, I've been like, when can I get my hands on this? When can I get my paws on suspense? Turns out maybe pretty soon. A couple days ago, Andrew committed it to master. So yeah, if you haven't seen it, you probably don't know why I'm excited, so I'll show you why I'm excited. What suspense is it's one of the first things that we're going to see that really exploits this fiber architecture pretty well, and plays with some of the async stuff that's now possible, and it is the jam. Right, so it's a feature where React can suspend rendering. Right, you can be rendering and you can suspend it and then do a continuation when something resolves. Now, Andrew Clark at React, he has got some crusade on loading spinners. I will tell you what, does not like them. So what this allows you to do is not show a loading spinner if you don't really need to. Right, there's like a threshold after which you need to show, because otherwise you can still have a little bit of a delay and still have a natural transition without it being too loady, right? And Andrew recently showed at Zeit Day really, really cool implications for server-side rendering with this. Typically in server-side rendering, which is the worst, you've had to do like a two-pass approach, right? Where you'd have to go through and like go through everything and be like, hey, you got your data? Hey, you got your data? Hey, hey. And then after you wrangle up all that data, then pass it back down, which is not dank. So with suspense, you'll be able to just be like, and then continue and just do that one pass. It's going to be dope, right? So the way that this works, the way that they're recommending is using this library that they've provided called Simple Cache Provider, which lets you kind of cache these values so that if they're not in the cache, it'll wait, and then if it is in the cache, it'll continue normally, right? I'll explain that more in a little bit. And then a thing called React Timeout, which is a wrapper that will wait for the thing that initiates from a cache call to, it'll either show loading or nothing, or kind of just wait. So the things that you might use this for are things like fetching data, code splitting, things like loading images. I'm just going to show how it works real quick. Right, so we have you import create resource from Simple Cache Provider, and let's say we wanted to do like a fetch. Here, washing the street. I mean, that's good. That's fine. So you have create resource here, and it takes like a promise in here. So we have this async function that does a fetch at this absurd URL, and then returns the JSON here. So if it has it, right, it'll just be instant. But if it doesn't, right, when you call, so we have the cache. So I should back up. There's this simple cache, this global cache that's included. There's also create cache where you can create your own, but I just use the global one. We have this consumer, same kind of pattern as regular context. You have your cache here, and then down here you can say this is your resource that you've defined, that promise. You can read and pass the cache to it. If it's there, it's just going to go right through. If it's not, it's going to suspend. But if you try and do this without a timeout component, it's going to say that there's no fallback UI and that you can't do it. So to use this, you need to add this timeout component, right? And you specify the time of the timeout, and if it did timeout, then you show the loading. Otherwise, you can show children, or if you have something else. So you just wrap whatever component has that resource call in it with the loader. Right? So if you've been doing this sort of thing up to this point, usually you'll do the fetch up here, and then you'll have like is loading in like state or something going down here, and then you'll render it. This kind of turns that around where your loader is above it, so it can catch when this cache call isn't hitting. And I'll show that more in a second. A little rough on time. And if you want to make it work on for it to actually suspend, it'll even out of async mode, it'll show your loader. But if you want it to wait for the timeout to show the loader, you either need to use this unstable async mode component, which will anything below that in the tree will be async mode, or you can use this new API, React DOM create root, which creates an async root right at the root of your application, and then you do root.render app. So it's time to run through some suspense demos. I got 5 minutes, so let's party. Okay. This is way less toast and bread and way more America, so there's that. All right, so we're going to look at using suspense for data real quick. All right. So a practical use here of suspense. Let's not worry about the imports for right now. I have these to-dos, right? And I'm using a fake simulated call here because I've learned to not trust conference Wi-Fi. So here I'm just going to resolve with these to-dos, but let's just say we fetched. And then down here I'm going to create this component called to-dos. And this is created by wrapping a component with this with cache. It's really just a helper right here that wraps the simple cache consumer and provides the cache here, because you end up doing that pretty often. So here we create this, and then we make our resource call, right? So this is one of the components that will throw one of those resource calls there. We say get to-dos read, and then we pass in the cache that we got from this with cache higher order component. So if our to-dos are not in there, right, this is going to throw something upwards. What it's going to throw it upwards to is a placeholder, this timeout component that we were just talking about. So we have this did timeout, and then it'll show this loading spinner, which, let me tell you, is the best loading spinner ever made. Trust me on this. Or it's going to show the children. So when we look at how this actually works, right, in our body, we have the placeholder, right, which is the thing that catches the suspended call. And then we have the to-dos, which tosses it up in the air. So let's see how that works, right? So if I hit refresh, right? So what you're not seeing is that it's not actually suspending it. I mean, it is. It's showing the loading UI. But you know, the thing is, we don't really want to show the loading UI unless we don't have to, right? So if we head back and take one more look here, got to run through this quick. Here, this takes 2 seconds, right? And our timeout is 0. So if we set the timeout to 1 second, you'll notice that when it refreshes, it's going to wait a whole second before it shows any of this loading UI. See? It's going to balk for that whole second. So if I were to then take this rascal down to 1,000, right, it would just render it on the spot. Well, maybe we have like a half a millisecond there, but you know, let's just set it down. Yeah, see, it just pops right in, right? So you have complete control over the process of how this whole thing is resolved, and it's bananas. But I'm working with like 2.5 minutes, so let's get this party started on the other demo. I'm going to publish this all up if anybody wants to play with it. Okay. So my next demo is I fetch a list of collaborators on my GitHub projects, and I show the images. I'm going to pop open my DevTools here for a second. Where do you do that? Network. Okay. Let's put it on 3G, right? And then you see it come in. Wow. Right, so you see the loader. I have suspense in here on the actual GraphQL call. Wow. Did I even need to put it? Yes, you see this? See how it all renders in? Oh my God, it's absolutely disgusting. All of them just chunking in. You don't see that in apps. So how can we fix this? How is this actually built and run through it? So we have our suspense here, and we have our app. I'm able to run select and pick different repos of people that I've let down. And then in here we have this placeholder. Our placeholder is the same timeout component that we were talking about before. And in here, right, we have images, and we pass down the repo. So here in images, we do some stuff that doesn't matter for right now. This is just a GraphQL call in here. But then you return image list. An image list is a list of all the different images, believe it or not. So this is a regular image, right? But I have another component here called the image component, because not only like data fetching or fetches or anything like that, but you can do almost any asynchronous thing in a suspension. So here, this is load image here. We are returning a promise for the image on load. So we create a resource that waits for an image to load and will cache it, and it's going to cache these images. So when that throws up, rather than waiting for a network request to call back, it's going to wait for an image to load up, okay? So, no, we're in images. I got 12 seconds left. Sorry, guys. So if we change this, whoa, yeah, maybe it didn't. Do I have a timer? Did I screw that up? Wow, live coding. I have a timeout here. Wait, no. This, oh, I'm a silly goose. I changed the wrong image. Yeah. I'm employed, believe that. So see how it's waiting for those? Did you see that? Let's run that back one more time just so you can see that, because it waits for them all to load. Oh my goodness, look at that. Oh, that's beautiful. And it doesn't look janky at all. Yeah. So I'm out of time, but I'm going to push this repo up. I hope everyone's nice and excited about context and suspense and the future of React. And today's going to be the shit. Thank you so much.